Hello, everybody. Happy to welcome today a treat for you. We're help you improve your LCAs, and today we are going to have Tess Konnovitch, who's our data visualization specialist at Earthship Global, and Gianni Guglielmi from Key Logic Systems. You will take it away. Bye.
Thank you, Holly. So yes, I'm really excited to present today with Gianni on ethical data visualization and LCA. And we're going to be talking about the balance between clarity, accessibility, impact, and a few other things. There we go. I'm going to start with a little description about me. So my name's Tess, and I have a very STEM-heavy background. I have my bachelor's in biology and a master's in computational biology, where I focused a lot on human-driven effects on ecosystems and organisms. I was so lucky to come across the data visualization specialist job at Earthshift Global, and during my time here, I've gotten to attend and speak at a number of conferences where I've learned a lot about the design side of LCA results, in addition to learning more about LCA.
And yeah, I'm Gianni. Also have a STEM heavy background. My bachelor's is in environmental engineering, and then my master's was officially civil, environmental, and sustainable engineering. It was more of a sustainability focus because my master's was focused on understanding which types of visuals in LCA can be effective or ineffective depending on the scenario you're in. And I was also really fortunate for that experience. That was a really fun research project to be a part of. And now I'm a lifecycle analyst and engineer at Key Logic Systems, where I'm mainly doing LCA modeling and reporting. But I still like to have my data visualization focus when the opportunities come. So yeah.
Thanks, Gianni. And some of you may know Gianni and I have worked together a lot. We've presented together, and we also have a guidance document that we're looking forward to updating in the future that you can find on Earthship's website. But today I'm going to start with why ethical visualization matters, and then I'll get into some of the ethical components that I consider when building my data visualizations. And then Gianni will bring his experience and research to talk about the practical challenges in visualizing LCA results specifically. And then I'm excited to conclude and discuss some upcoming opportunities we have here at Earthshift. And we will be leaving time for questions. I have my timer going to make sure we have time for you guys. Okay. So let's start with why ethical visualization matters in LCA. Some of you may be familiar with this visual. I've shown it a few times at different talks, and I usually like to emphasize that although it is easy to get your data, well, it's not easy to get your data, that's the hard part. It's easy to just click insert chart and be done with it. It feels like the appropriate and accurate thing to do. In previous talks, I've emphasized the importance of the story. And while, yes, hit insert chart, insert a ton of charts, look at them, but then as the life cycle analyst, think about your story and then create the visual that's going to the external audiences. Your audience is trusting you to develop this message and tell them the truth about the data. And sometimes just hitting insert chart doesn't really convey the truth, and we're going to talk about that a bit today. And I want to expand upon this figure here to also consider the outcome that you want. When we're collecting our data and we make our visual, there's a few things that happen. We leave some things out. When we create a bar chart, we can't include all the data. Sometimes we're grabbing means, sometimes we're grabbing other data. And the things that we leave out are due to ethical considerations, external pressures, assumptions that we make about our audience and about the data, and some biases we have. And then we create this visual that then has an impact on decision making. And this could be policies, investments, and how our audience perceives the data. So things like they could take action based on it, or there could be inaction. And Gianni's going to discuss that a bit more. So now let's dive into the ethical considerations. I think of these 6 considerations when I'm personally developing a visual. I'm sure there are many others that we have to balance, but these are the ones I'm going to talk about today. Starting with accuracy. Now, again, as you know, I have a very STEM-heavy background, so it has been drilled in me for 8+ years, the importance of accuracy and data, especially accuracy in your data. But now as I've become a designer and started to think more about my audience, which really wasn't something I thought about when I was in grad school or undergrad, data was king, accuracy was king. Now I work at a company where stakeholders are important. And while this data table, it might feel like the most accurate thing to put out there is a data table every time, the data is there, draw your conclusions. It's important to think about most people probably don't know what to do with a data table. For most people, these three columns especially, they might not even know what they are. A lot of people can't distinguish a mean or a median, the difference between the two. And a lot of people, if they see 95th percentile, will probably run the opposite direction. Most people haven't taken statistics. Most people probably haven't taken a math course in a very long time. And so today I want to think about accuracy, not just about data accuracy, but thinking about when your audience looks at your visual and they take your message, is that message that they walk away with accurate? Because they're going to be communicating your research, they're going to be communicating your findings. Is what they're spreading, is it like fake news, or are they actually spreading the right message? I think that is something we should consider with accuracy as well. And that's why we use bar charts, right? People like percentages, people like stacked bars. It's easy to do the math here. It's in tens. For the most part, people can do that math. However, we know percentages might not be the most accurate picture, so maybe you want to use units. But this is where, and we'll get into this, where accuracy and accessibility start to butt heads. Have people been afforded the opportunities in education to know what these units mean? Are they able to do research to figure out the units mean? Can they interpret these charts as easy as they can interpret this one? That is where we need to evaluate the audience we're presenting to and then make those decisions. And now, after dealing with LCA data for over 2 years, I really like violin plots. I think they're one of the best representations of our data because there's so much uncertainty involved. However, how many stakeholders like it depends or like that there's a range? Most of them want the mean. They want one number that they can put on a marketing presentation or a billboard. They want one number. Also, I had never, as someone with 6 years in science education, I had never seen, and multiple biostatistics courses, I had never seen a violin plot until I came to Earthshift. And I was intimidated. So you can imagine the general public, this might be really intimidating. So again, accuracy isn't just about that the numbers are correct. It's can people look at your work and take away what the data means? And that's where our responsibility falls. Now, since we're on accuracy, I wanted to talk about 2 data accuracy points. So when developing the figures for this presentation, I found that I made a typo, and I thought it was a great time to talk about how to increase accuracy through minimizing human error. And we do this by automating. So an easy way we can do this in Excel, don't type things out. Instead of typing out raw materials, I referenced the original raw materials. Have a data sheet, and then every other spreadsheet cross-reference the data for multiple reasons. I'm sure we've all experienced working on a beautiful visual or project, and then the client comes with updated data. If you have to update your data on multiple sheets, one, that's a lot of human error that can happen. Also, it's pretty annoying. So I wanted to emphasize cross-reference and minimize that human error when you can. Also avoid manipulative techniques like this axis here. If you're going to use a manipulative technique, you need to annotate and make sure your audience knows. Otherwise, it's sneaky, it's not accurate, it's not transparent, which we're going to get into as well. So these were 2 little notes I wanted to add to the accuracy category. And now let's get into clarity. So as you can imagine, accuracy and clarity sometimes compete when creating a visual. And so the goal is to simplify without oversimplifying. And there's 4 things I like to think about when trying to be more clear, but not oversimplifying and not losing the data, and thus not losing the message you're trying to convey. You want to strive for simplicity, but make sure the nuance and detail is still there. And sometimes I do this by writing out the key details or the key data points that need to be visible on the chart. And then at the end, and do this before you make the visual, because then when you make the visual, you can go and check it off. Limit colors and patterns, we'll talk about that a little bit in accessibility. Keep text concise, and avoid cognitive overload. And I'm actually going to talk a bit about accessibility now. I think when people think accessibility and ADA standards, they like to think color contrast. Is the text big enough? And I want to encourage you to also think about cognitive overload. So people who may have more cognitive disabilities and the average person who isn't experienced with data. Is it in a format that's easily parsed, easily read, easy to follow? That's also an accessibility concern. I think people get really hung up on contrast and then have a very busy chart and think it's accessible. And I think it's something that needs to be talked about a little more. So I'm going to give you an example. This is what I'm talking about. This is busy. I don't know what's going on. It's small. I can't read it. It's overwhelming. Probably most people would just walk away from it. So then we use hierarchy charts like a sunburst. I prefer the tree map. People like squares better. People can actually interpret the data on square shapes better. But we can still do more. So one thing I want to show you, because before I had said avoid manipulative manipulation unless you annotate correctly. So I want to show you an example of how we can do this and how it shows accuracy and clarity. Here in red, I highlighted using conditional formatting, I highlighted everything that's under 2%. And then I removed it from the figure. And I think this is something I've heard a lot where removing data from a figure feels bad. A lot of people would rather have this there because everything's there and I didn't change anything, than it feels honest, but it's not interpretable. So instead, you can manipulate your figure, you remove data, and create something more easy to follow like this. All of the detail and nuance is still here. It's easily parsed, easily read, right? We have the life cycle. I rearranged it before Microsoft wanted to arrange the squares in order of greatest. Instead, I changed it to the life cycle. I took out anything that you couldn't see and put it below. So now I'm using big headings for the phases. I'm using medium-sized text for the major contributors, and then smaller italic text for the smaller contributors. Everything is still there. We're maintaining nuance and detail. Only 5 colors, which is a dream for most LCA visualizations. I very rarely get to use just 5 colors. The text is concise. I can read everything. It's legible. It's also an SVG, so if this was a PDF, you could zoom in on these smaller categories if you needed to. And you're avoiding that cognitive overload. It's a very clear flow of information. And it's the same data as this. And it takes up the same space, maybe less than a report. So it hits all the steps. It's accurate and it's clear. I wish I had 3 hours to talk about accessibility. I have about 30 seconds to a minute. So I'm going to talk more broadly. Again, you have color contrast, you have cognitive overload. There's a lot of considerations. And the hardest part is that there's really not a ton of guidance, especially in data visualization. I really like this quote from the ADA that an inaccessible website, and we have to go off website guidelines because they don't have anything on data viz, an inaccessible website can exclude people just as much as steps at an entrance to a physical location. Now, I clearly don't build staircases for a living, but I imagine there's specific blueprints for an accessible staircase or a ramp. There is no specific blueprint. There's no tool that we can plug our data in and every time it generates an accessible figure, at least not right now. So there's a lot of decisions we have to make. And in my previous brown bag webinar, I talked a little bit more about accessibility and specific things you can do in Microsoft. But there's a lot of research online and I linked them below. But again, there's no blueprint. And so we have to kind of balance accessibility with clarity and accuracy. The next 2 things I want to talk about are transparency and privacy, and they often go head to head. Transparency is really important for a number of reasons, stakeholder trust, but also accessibility. And I think if you can add the full data table in the appendix to every report, I really recommend that because I used to have a professor in grad school and he had a color vision impairment. And I would make these beautiful figures and he would not say he didn't care, but he would say, just show me the data, just show me the table. And I would always have the table. And so you don't know how people interpret data or how they can understand data. Some people want the table. Maybe they're going to make their own charts so that they can understand them. Having the data available is important, again, for accessibility, but also your stakeholders can evaluate and trust your visuals. You don't want a black box visual. If you have the data, they might not even look at it, but they know that you can back it up. Now, where this can become an issue is privacy reasons, right? So if your data table has sensitive information or if it has client names or things like that, that's obviously not, you have to balance transparency and privacy because they both influence stakeholder trust. Also, be cautious with AI and online tools. I really like tools like raw graphs, which is online, and they say they're safe. I still will completely anonymize anything I use. So instead of using actual phases or anything, I say A, B, C, D, and then I know in my key. So just try and protect your clients, protect yourself anytime you're creating visuals. So those are the 6 I want to talk about, which you have to balance. And you also have to balance stakeholder goals and biases. So here you are, I'm imagining most of you fall into this category. You have your own goals and biases, right? You want clear, accurate, and transparent data visuals, but you're also feeling some pressure, and you might have an interpretive bias. Then you have a designer like me, who I luckily have a very STEM heavy background, so I still maintain accuracy, but I know a lot of designers might prioritize aesthetic maybe over accuracy. There's times where if the pie slice was just a little bit bigger, the visual looks so much better and I would be so much happier. So you have to kind of balance those. But based on our ACLCA survey results, most of you wear both of these hats. So most LCA practitioners are also designing their own figures. So you have to balance all of these in addition to your client who wants, actual insights and to be able to communicate their results, but they also probably love their product and want to confirm that they think they have the best product in the world, right? So kind of thinking about how to balance that. Your client has additional pressures, as do you, investors, consumers, their marketing team. And then we all have even more pressure from the government, environmentalists, the public. So in addition to the 6 ethical considerations I went through before, we have to balance the stakeholder goals and biases. And you can imagine how all of these intertwined makes it really difficult to know what the best visual is. So now Gianni's going to talk about this and these challenges in LCA data visualization specifically.
Thanks, Tess. And yeah, one point I wanted to mention about your part, I feel like those ethical factors, while this is like an LCA centric presentation, they really are applicable for any scenario you're involved in. So even if you're not doing LCA every day at your job, those ethical factors are really impactful. But yeah, as Tess mentioned, I'm going to dive a little bit into challenges in LCA specific data visualization and some ways that we can approach certain solutions. And so, yeah, looking at this, if you're in the LCA field, we all know these 4 basic steps to conducting an LCA. When you dive into it a little more, however, you notice that you can see the gaps between practitioner and decision maker, where in this case, the practitioner is really focused on making sure the inventory is, accurate, complete, transparent, maybe, and that it's accurate results and it's being translated properly into impacts. And in some cases, you even want the results to be reproducible. Whereas the decision maker is making sure that the goal, the scope of their work, the way the results are being shown and interpreted are best for their product, service, or system. And so you can see this kind of gap here. And Tess mentioned it with that visual going from data to story. The real way to really like bridge this gap has always been to use a visual. And the best way we know how to do that is when you start learning LCA, use maybe an LCA software package. And if you go to the next slide, there are each software package, has a little uniqueness to each one, but they normally present visuals in a very similar way. And so you're motivated, especially as a new practitioner, you're motivated to use your visuals the way that they do it because you feel like that the software knows best. And it does beg the question, are these types of visuals always going to be effective for our scenarios? We have so many different scenarios as the LCA field grows, so many different disciplines that we are tasked with, making solutions for. How do we know that these visuals are effective for sure? You can also go outside of the software and oh no, you're good.
Oh, good.
Yeah, thanks. um, and we obviously know that there's a huge variety of like programs and like even things like Excel and PowerPoint can be just as effective. And so there's actually plenty of ways to visualize results. But for LCA specifically, when you're presented with all these types of visuals now, it kind of asks the same question, like, how do you know which visual is going to be effective for your scenario and for your clients? So up until recently, there really has been like little guidance on choosing the right visual and how to properly communicate those results. And that lack of guidance and direction can lead to the practitioner or the decision maker to be confused with what the results are showing them. And in a worst case scenario, it could lead to uninformed decision makings, which defeats the purpose of the LCA. So with that, I'm going to give a little example of what a practitioner could be challenged with in a certain scenario. So let's say you're tasked with comparing between a client's product and like a baseline or conventional scenario, and you just want to look at one impact category. So maybe you choose like a bar chart, and you look at the results and you see that, okay, this is clearly showing the results. You wonder if there can be a little more data that could be shown. Maybe you want to show some uncertainty to really grasp like the full depth of the data. So now you're addressing a little bit of uncertainty with a blur chart. Error bars could do something similar as well. And you look at this and you think, okay, the uncertainty is there, the average value is there, but I wonder if there's, a little bit more that I could show with the data that the client might benefit from. So maybe you add another visual and do like a violin plot or something like that. This could be honestly in addition to the bar graph now. So now you're looking at one, maybe two visuals, and now you're kind of questioning, are these violin plots really something that they're familiar with? Like Tess mentioned, she just learned about violin plots when she was at Earthship Global. I was in a similar position when I interned there as well. And it does beg the question, are they going to really understand what this is showing? And now you test all these visuals and you're kind of left with like a big question of what to do and what not to do. And I feel like this isn't an uncommon situation, and it could be easy to resort to certain visuals, but you don't really know for sure if it's going to be effective. We can even go a step deeper and talk about some risks in visualizing LCA results. If you want to go to the next slide, I think. Yes, perfect. And this was a paper done a couple years back with Valentina Prado. And I should put the citation there, but this was describing the risks of improper communications and visualizations of results, specifically looking at comparisons and informing, business-related decisions like your clients. And these are 4 very real scenarios that could happen where you have either a small or large difference in the average value of results. And then also you can look at, how great the difference is in relation to the uncertainty in the data. So looking at differences and discernibility. And these are all 4 very real situations that can occur that can lead to a hesitation in how to best communicate these results. That bottom right quadrant is honestly the most risky situation where, let's say you didn't even want to address uncertainty. You would have no idea that the values could actually be much closer to the true value than it actually is without showing the uncertainty. So yeah, this pretty much just detailed that there are risks in misinterpreting results, and this can lead to a flawed communication approach. And so it is our responsibility as practitioners to really understand the data. We know that LCA can give very descriptive and detailed results, but it's our responsibility to be able to translate that into a prescriptive and valuable decision. And so going off of that, so this was part of my graduate work that helped develop with Tess's experience into our guidance document. But the focus of my grad work specifically was on how to best visualize results and which ones were effective and ineffective depending on the scenario you're in. And one thing we came across during my time was we noticed that there's at least 4 factors that we as practitioners should be considering when choosing the right visual. The goal of the study, and the goal can go a lot deeper than just like, oh, this is just an LCA on product X. But I'll dive into that a little bit more. Audience's level of understanding is really important. Data uncertainty, we already talked about. And then qualitative explanation, always an important factor. And, after doing surveys and deep literature reviews on visuals and things like that, we came across a couple results, and I'm going to be presenting some of that guidance on visuals we recommend to consider and avoid. And just one more point, this study was definitely focused. Oh no, you can go to the next slide. Thanks. this was focused on hotspot identification and comparisons as like the very like broad umbrella categories. There's obviously way more scenarios like benchmarking and like EPD and marketing purposes. But we kept these two umbrella terms in case you know, want to dive into something more specific. These can be the two broad categories. And yeah, the big question is which visual is effective towards a communication for my scenario. So yeah, for hotspots, um, the study found that there are plenty of visuals that people really thought was effective, and they interpreted the results really well. So, you know, heat maps, the sunburst diagram, or like a donut chart. Um, a typical bar graph was effective for the scenario we tested. Um, Even the bar chart that's stacked to 100% to look at hotspots was really effective. And yeah, people love the tree map and the Sankey diagram. Qualitative explanation, people couldn't say enough how important it was to helping them interpret the results. Um, Going off of that, a table just on its own was an ineffective way to present results. I think a table with qualitative explanation can certainly be helpful, but you want to make sure you know that your audience understands, you know, the details that are going to be coming when you just present a table. And then that stacked bar chart is effective to the extent of how many processes and how many layers you want to show. You know, Tess brought up how limiting colors can be, you know, effective in the way you present results. And it really showed in this study that if you had too many of those divisions, people were confused on how to best address mitigating the impacts of a certain product. So diving into comparisons, yeah, this one was cool too to see the findings. Bar charts, simple bar charts were effective. I know I showed, I think in my study, like a 3D bar chart with like different scenarios, and that one wasn't as effective. But a normal bar chart, even with error bars, I think error bars are something that's really common in the LCA field. So I wasn't surprised that people were able to really interpret that well. A dot plot where, you know, the dots are alternatives instead of bars were really effective there. And then a stacked bar chart that's not stacked to percentages was really effective. I think using percentages was not an effective way for your comparison cases. That was for hotspots. Um, and then, yeah, going off the things to avoid tables was a similar situation. A big thing that was really interesting that I was glad that I tested was seeing if people would understand if you're using distinct units over multiple impact categories is not a way to compare across different impacts. You need to normalize those results. And some people noticed, other people tried to like give an answer on what they would choose when the answer was there is no solution. Um, and yeah, the stacked bar chart, there's no really way to see a comparison if you're using the units of percentages. So those are our main findings there. And the biggest finding is designing the visual with the goal of the study in mind is a preferable way to have an effective visual. And I wanted to touch a little bit on the goal where, like I said, the goal is not just saying like, oh, this is just going to be an LCA on product X. There's so much more. Maybe I should have said goal and scope because there's a lot more like detail that goes into it. You know, as a practitioner, we have the, you know, choice and motivation to let our stakeholders know what could be a good goal and scope to actually address these results accurately and like, you know, comprehensively. You don't want to just, you don't always necessarily need to choose one impact category because the stakeholder might be concerned that the other impacts might make their product look worse. That could create some like, you know, decision bias there. And there's also other factors like how much uncertainty you want to look at. And do you want to do any normalization, any weightings? All those things are the goal in this case. And so having all of that in mind will really help guide you with the best visual for your scenario.
Thanks, Gianni. And I was happy when you added this quote because I think I focus on story so much because as like a data
Right,
visualization specialist and a storyteller, that's what I focus on. But the goal and
right,
scope is a big part of the story, right? And so
right.
you want to make sure the data isn't dictating the visual. While it's a big component, like Gianni said, like the goal and scope is also really important. Is it answering some of the questions you set out? Is it answering what people are coming to find in the report? Those are things
Yeah.
to think about too.
Yeah, I like to think that the goal and the story we tell helps guide our visuals much more simply once we know those. I agree.
Yep. And it prevents like cherry picking and such too, to keep making sure you keep coming back, because if you let the data drive, that's where people can
Exactly.
get into trouble. But if you have all of the things in mind, in addition to all the things we talked about, it's a lot to
Right.
consider, but then you're creating a more transparent visual ultimately.
Exactly.
Okay, so we're going to conclude. Like I said before, our ACLCA survey showed most of us wear the LCA practitioner and designer hat. Luckily, I don't. I get to just be the designer. But a lot of you have to do both. And so it's important to think about, normally designers are considered like the gatekeepers of the data, and they're the ones who see if you can understand things. LCA practitioners take on this responsibility as well. And so it's up to you guys, and I'll say us because I do it too, to accurately represent the data, make sure it's clear, accessible, and inclusive. And again, we don't have these standardized rules yet. It's important to keep staying up to date. And it's not just a moral thing, it's not just an ethical thing, something you can like rest your head at night. It's also you work so hard to collect this data. You want it to impact the most amount of people. You want it to impact all of your stakeholders. And if they can't interact with your work, then it can't cause an impact. And like we tied it back to the outcome, you won't have the desired outcome that you want. So I know in addition to all of your duties in your job, I just added a ton more. I'm saying, think about accuracy, think about clarity, think about your audience, think about all of these things. And it can be really overwhelming to balance all of these just in your data visuals, not even talking about your actual work and all the data collection, where a lot of these principles apply to that as well. So balancing these challenges isn't easy, but the right tools and guidance can make it easier. And with that little segue, I'm really excited to announce some upcoming opportunities at EarthShift Global. I am launching with EarthShift 3 courses. So the first is a free 1-hour course where we'll dive into some fundamentals. I feel like in the last few talks I've given over the last 2 years, I do a lot of clicking around and I go really fast and I talk more broadly. Now I'm excited to get to go in depth and actually show participants how to actually do these things, engage with the audience and not talk so broadly, slow down a bit so you can see where my mouse is going. Because these tools, which like Adobe, which can seem intimidating, can really make your life so much easier and make your work so much easier. And even Microsoft Office, a lot of us are using Microsoft Office. I bet if I did a survey where most people are only using like 10% of its visualization capacity. There's so many Excel tools that you can be using as well. So I'm really excited to share these. This QR code is here. It's also on our website. So when I click to the next slide, no, you can find it on EarthShift's website under training. But so Gianni and I have presented a lot together, and we always end with this quote. So science isn't finished until it's communicated. We're like Mark Walport's little marketing team. We use this all the time. But we also like to further say science isn't finished until it's understood. And so when we first gave this talk, it was more about understanding LCA data, but now it's expanded to are our visuals accessible? Are they ethical? Can everyone interpret them? So it's far beyond just, is it representing the data? Can people understand it? And that's what Gianni and I continue to work towards. And I'm excited to work with all of you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Tess. Thanks, Gianni. We have several questions for you. I first have a request. Can we please put in the chat the link to register for the courses and have that available for people? And now on to the questions. First question, do you ever use Power BI and have tips on how to get better designing data visualizations in that program?
Gianni, have you used Power BI?
Little bit, not too much yet.
So I don't use it in my current work, but that is something we'll be tackling in that third course. That and Tableau and some of those more advanced things that I don't get to use every day. I'm really excited to go and apply that to LCA data in preparation for that course. So Tips to come. I don't have any specific ones right now, but it's definitely a really advanced tool that I think could make LCA visualization a lot easier. Gianni, I'm going to have you answer the next one because I am going to find that link for Karen and put it in the chat.
Okay.
All right, Gianni, you ready? Here it
Let's
is.
hear it.
I love how you are approaching ethics from readers' perception. Do you have recommendations for presenting to company executives?
Yeah, good question. I would say biggest thing is I hate in the LCA world trying to use it depends, but try and get an understanding of what these company executives know about LCA methodology. And if we're assuming it's like a little bit more like a basic level understanding, more simple graph is going to be the solution. Try and relate it to a story too. We don't see a lot in like papers and like LCA reports and journal articles and stuff that they have a visual and then say like, this is equivalent to this many emissions being reduced, like this many cars being removed off the roads, this many like buildings being prevented from being constructed, things like that. So those types of stories I think will connect with execs more because they like a story as well and they like to market in certain ways. So if you can help start that process for them, any way like that is great.
I would add to that, keep in mind that executives are looking at how am I going to make a decision?
Right.
And making sure that the data that you're presenting is supporting their understanding of the work and aligns with their business objectives and the decisions that they need to make based on the data.
Right.
Next one, if the comparative uncertainty result shows that two products' impacts are indistinguishable in one category, is it ethical to show a bar chart showing that one is better in that category?
I can
Was
start.
that
Oh, go
go
ahead.
for it? Yeah, no, please.
I think Gianni's point to a qualitative explanation is really important because we often show stacked bars and it might look like things are bigger or less. And it's not, a lot of people don't always include uncertainty, and not all clients want uncertainty. But I think that qualitative explanation needs to be there. So I think it's unethical if you just show two bars and then don't comment on it, or if you say, like, this is better. But I don't think it's necessarily unethical to just put it in there, but then in your description, make sure you say the range is this. And I would prefer that the range is shown. I would prefer that it's a violin, a bar with error bars, or right on the chart. But knowing people's capabilities, I think I think you can have either and have it ethical as long as it's said somewhere. I don't know what you think, Gianni.
No, that's a great point. Yeah. I think the qualitative explanation would be huge there. I think if they are indistinguishable in uncertainty and close in average value, you could also show the exact value on top of the graph, so people can know how different it is in case they like missed the like magnitude of the axis. That could be really important to see as well. But I agree. I think the qualitative explanation would be important there.
I also think, and I think we do this a lot now that I'm thinking about it, Earth Shift, we often put ranges, maybe not on the chart, but then in that qualitative explanation, whether it's a PowerPoint or a report. Because again, if you have the chart, say you have a stack bar and you put the values, there's no difference. They're still going to make maybe that comparison like, oh, this is bigger and that's less. That's where it's really important to either say on the figure or say right next to the figure, despite the means, which is important data that a lot of stakeholders want to see, whether or not it's indistinguishable. And that range will tell you if they overlap or not.
Right.
Great. Next question. If you had to pick one ethical red flag to watch for when visualizing LCA data, what would it be?
Do you
Do
want
I
to
go
go
first?
I feel like we both should answer.
Yeah, we definitely should. I think I'll choose a specific visual first. Spider plots, be careful. That is like my biggest one. I did a little prelim study in grad school, and right off the bat, there were a lot of people that chose an area. They chose like one that looked like the biggest area on the plot rather than the normalized values, like what that total would look like. So that just right off the bat can be a misleading one. But that's what I think of initially. What about you, Tess?
So I had to search spiderplex. I think they're also, are they called radar charts too? I thought they were
I
the
think
same.
so.
Yeah,
Yes.
so I'm familiar with that term. What I think is funny is my answer is kind of the opposite. It's oversimplification, whereas I feel like a radar chart was like, that's super complex, and I think that's probably why people, they're not familiar with it and they might
Yeah.
pull. But I think if I oversimplification without a table is my biggest red flag. I think especially in LCA, our data is not that simple ever. And so if something's really simplified, I love icons. I love using icons and pictorial charts, always backed up by data. So if I see a very simple figure with no table backup, I typically don't trust it. I would say that's a red flag to me.
So agree.
Great. How do you handle situations where a stakeholder wants an LCA visualization to look better than the data really supports?
Do you have experience with this, Gianni? Has that ever happened that you feel like sharing?
Ah, not directly with my job. Did you have one? I have an answer, but
I'll hear your answer. I can start. So I'm
yeah.
lucky where I have the analyst buffer and the Karen buffer if it ever came to it. Um, but I think I've thought about, this instance before, and I think going back to the goal of the study, like we talked about, the goal and the scope and the objective, because I think this is an example of how I talked about don't let the data drive, because then you start to say, well, what if we only showed this data? And what if we only showed that data? That's letting the data drive, and that's where we can start to cherry pick. And it's
Right.
not always malicious, right? It's like we just want things to look nice and we want to, especially stakeholders. So kind of going back to the goal and scope, but yeah, I'm lucky to have a
Yeah.
team that I don't think it's happened, but if it did, I would have a team to help me navigate that.
Yeah, that's a great point. I would say if this is like a report or something, you can always have a quote unquote better looking visual in the earlier stages, and then those with more understanding, more experience can see like a more detailed visual later. If this is just going to be something that's on a web page or something like that, I would agree with Tess. Definitely make sure the goal is still being met with a like more attractive visual. And yeah, maybe test out different visuals with the stakeholder, see if they like a more attractive visual that maybe shows a couple more numbers, like that bar chart scenario or like a tree map. Um, yeah, otherwise, just test some other visuals out and make sure the data is being shown and that the goal is not being like twisted, like Tess mentioned.
Great. Next one. What's a small but impactful change we can all make today to improve the ethics of our LCA visualizations?
I have two. The first I already talked about. So make sure you're cross-referencing in Excel. Tidy your data. We it's much more clear. You'll avoid errors that way. The other is download BrightSlide, which is a little plugin. You can check contrast, you can check accessibility, you can check everything. And if you don't feel like downloading it, Microsoft Office has those tools available. So I think my tip is look at the tools that are available to you because Microsoft has templates and everything you need to be accessible. Most people just don't know where to even find them. But if you have Microsoft, you have access to it. And I think very simple things I've personally changed in our templates, in our figures, have a high accessibility impact. And they were pretty easy to do.
That's great.
Tess,
Oh
I'm
yeah,
sorry. Can you repeat that resource name?
Yes, and you know what? While Gianni's answering, I'll link it. How about that? It's
Okay,
Bright Slide, and I will link it. Thank you, Karen.
thank you.
sure. Um, Small, but it was a small but impactful change. Was that the question?
Mhm.
Cool. Um, I think one right off the bat is if you have a visual and you notice you're taking a lot to explain what the visual means, like qualitatively, I think that would be an indicator that you may want a different visual or you may want to show something different than you're initially showing. So that can be like a little indicator. That's one I think right off the bat.
I like that one. I think I have, early in my career at Earthshift, fell into that trap where I felt like everyone should just know how to do violins. And I think there's both sides. On one hand, audience is important, but I think I also want to emphasize, on the other hand, your audience is often smarter than you think, and that's why your qualitative explanation is important too. If you explain something, people can understand it. But like Gianni said, if you have to explain paragraphs, it's probably not the right chart to use. Your chart shouldn't take that much explanation.
Agreed. Yeah.
Next question. How do you deal with data gaps or uncertainty in LCA without making a visualization look cluttered?
You want to go first or me, Tess?
Sure. I can address the gaps, I think.
Okay.
When I'm picturing gaps, or I guess I'm thinking more when you have a lot of data, or like data sets that aren't consistent. So you might have really small groups or really big groups, and Gianni kind of touched on that a bit, or you might have gaps some places. I provided an example a little bit showing you how to take that tree map, remove things, etc. I really recommend that process, how I did, where you're annotating, you're removing things you can't see. Maybe there's gaps, maybe it's the uncertainty. So you're removing the clutter, but then look at that clutter and ask yourself, what value did that add? What detail did that add? And find a new way to add it. So with that tree map that I showed in the clarity section, the clutter was all of these boxes that had no labels. They were too small. You couldn't even see what they were. I just took them out. And then I sat and thought, okay, but what was that clutter telling me? And then I found a new, more efficient or succinct way to display that on the chart. And it looks a lot better.
Definitely. Yeah, data gaps and uncertainty without, what was it? Without making it look cluttered, right? Yeah, okay. Oh, that's a good question. Without making it look cluttered. I think right off the bat, people in the industry, at least in our field, like error bars. They're not like too aggressive with how much space they take up. I think I've seen some visuals where you have a stacked bar chart and error bars and like a dot in the middle that's like the net value. That's where it gets too much. So I think if you really want to show your uncertainty, I wouldn't also like stack a bar up and show like too much data like that. And if you don't want to show uncertainty, you can, again, have it in those like little captions, like the under 2% of impacts, like Tess showed, and have a much more clear visual, like a tree map or like a sunburst diagram.
I'll go even further. Do not put error bars on a stacked bar. There are so many areas of misinterpretation. Is the top error bar for the whole bar? Don't do that. Instead, you can break them into, if you have a stack of, a whiteboard would be helpful here, but if you have a stacked bar of 5 groups, you can make 5 different charts the same size and have each of them be their own. It's called a panel chart. So you can have 5 panels. It's like a grid. Then you can have an error bar on each of these. Still, it takes, again, what I think about when I'm making visuals is, does it take up the same amount of space in the report, but does it save, is it clearer? Does it save time? And so that's an example. If you want to add uncertainty to a stacked bar, just have 5 x-axes on top of each other, and then each one gets to be their own little bar. Then you can do everything. It takes up the same amount of space on a report, and there's no misinterpretation. Adding error bars to a stacked bar is very prone to misinterpretation. I'm glad you brought that up, Gianni. That's something I should write down and say over and over. I don't like that.
Likewise.
All right, we have one more question for today. And that is, how do you make LCA visuals accessible to non-experts without oversimplifying?
I think the example, I'm trying to think of another example on top of the one I gave, where, and it goes back to what Gianni and I kind of said, what is your message? What are the details you need to include? Goal and scope. And most people can understand those 4 things: a message, goal, scope. Maybe say scope is something else, maybe define it a little bit. That could be a tough one, but people understand those 4 things. So maybe a qualitative explanation. Again, it could just be listed. It could be in a table. Anytime you can annotate, which is putting a little text box on your graph, do that. Our audiences are smarter sometimes than we think, and they can understand things. What they don't understand is the scientific jargon that we all like to use. So minimizing that jargon, adding qualitative explanation, that I think is important. And when it comes to oversimplifying, you want to remove clutter from your chart, but feel free to add clutter to the qualitative explanation. I don't think you can over-explain in text. I think that's really important. You can overdo it on the figure, but when it comes to writing, I think more is better there.
Great point. And I think I'm going to use a scenario where you're more like presenting results to like a stakeholder via like PowerPoint, let's say, or something. If it's non-experts, I always love to show like one thing that Tess really highlighted in her like ACLCA conference was like that morph transition slide. So that type of slide transition can help like make a like visual like transition to different things. So you could like start with like scenario 1, maybe it's like a high impact, and then like the next slide could be like a little arrow down that shows the smaller bar. I think they would really appreciate like a more like a video, like an interactive type of presentation that shows, instead of just like a what's the word, like a static visual that has like a lot of data, you can kind of expose the data to them like piece by piece. And yeah, I think that'd be a great way. And then they can ask questions along the way too if you have it across like multiple slides. Yeah, that'd be my initial thought.
And I think you hit on the point of accessibility isn't just the color contrast, it's a digestible order of explaining something. So instead of a lot of scientists, because that's what we want. When I was in grad school, I did not want a pretty figure unless I made it. But if I did a meta-analysis, which is where I had to pull the data from thousands of figures throughout paper using like an extractor. Pretty figures were a nightmare. I wanted all of the data so I could pull it. And that's what scientists often want. And I think that's why it can be hard for scientists to then flip and go to stakeholders. We need a slow build up, like Gianni said, and you can do that through animation. But we don't want cognitive overload, and just pasting a chart with a ton of data can lead to that cognitive overload. So I totally agree. The step by step, I'm glad you love the more feature. It's my favorite thing.
That's the best.
Build up to the message. Again, going back to your message.
All right, that's all of our questions for today. Tess or Gianna, any final words of wisdom that you would like to share?
We may have covered it all. Yeah, science isn't finished until it's understood. Well, I'll say it again.
Yes, and if you're having trouble with any of this, or if you just want to learn more, I'm really excited to host the courses. So I'm excited. And again, it'll be less general. I know all of my talks are always very general, and I've had people want the nitty-gritty. I'm excited to dive into the nitty-gritty for hours on end in these courses.
All right. Thank you both for a really valuable presentation and for the opportunities for further learning. So I think with that, we're all set.
Thank you, Karen. Thank you, everyone.